Wells embarked on fairly new territory when she became one of the first African-American women to run for public office when she unsuccessfully sought a Senate seat in the state of Illinois the year before her death. However, the most significant and inspiring label that Wells wore proudly was given to her by her many detractors, that of race agitator. In fact, at one point, the Military Intelligence Division considered Wells to be a far more dangerous agitator than Marcus Garvey. As a teen in the late 19th century, Wells was the first African-American woman to attempt to sue a railroad company, which even precedes the landmark railway car discrimination case Plessy v. Ferguson, 1892, which resulted in the expansion of Jim Crow laws across the country. Wells's case also precedes the successful campaigns against the racially biased employment practices of railroad companies led by Asa Phillips Randolph, 1889 to 1979, throughout the mid and late 20th century. Even though she was always willing to confront racism early in her life, Wells became a race agitator when her writings began to awaken America's conscience regarding lynching. There is an old riddle that goes, "If a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it fall, does it make a sound?" Wells would become that sound for countless numbers of black lynching victims throughout her lifetime, victims whose deaths would go unnoticed otherwise. During the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 77, in the decade following the Civil War, 1861 to 65, lynching became common practice in the South and continued to happen well into the 21st century. The Tuskegee Institute recorded nearly 5,000 lynchings that took place between 1882 and 1968. Lynching often involved the apprehension of unsuspecting victims and then hanging them from trees or light posts. Additionally, lynch mobs burned their victims alive and filled their lifeless bodies with bullets. Victims were also mutilated by incensed crowds and photos, and small pieces of their charred flesh, teeth, and articles of clothing were often distributed as souvenirs. Some victims were lynched under the assumption that they had committed a criminal offense, and the lynchings generally took place whether the actual offense was committed by an accused individual or not. The most popular excuses provided for lynching black victims was often the sexual assault or rape of white women or stealing, but victims were also murdered for standing up to their white employers and crimes as petty as being sassy to whites. Investigations of these crimes generally ended with the superficial determination that the murders took place at the hands of parties that are unknown. For over a century, lynching was a widespread practice that often went uncontested, and lynch mobs were hardly ever brought to justice. Ida B. Wells was one of the first to publicly contest this practice, and she began to do so after three of her closest friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart, were lynched in 1892. Each of the victims were known to be successful, law-abiding, upstanding citizens.